South Africa celebrates National Women's Month every August the 9th. And this month is a very, very special month for us also here at the Northwest University. As we kick off the celebrations of this month, we want to bring on board and the awareness of the importance of human rights versus women's rights. We believe quite strongly that women's rights are a big part of human rights and must be treated as such. So as the Northwest University, in kickstarting these activities, we have invited a very important advocate of human rights, none other than our beloved and powerful Judge Navi Pillay. Judge Navi Pillay, as we all know, is a former High Commissioner for Human Rights in the United Nations. He's going to talk to our students about human rights and women's rights. At the Northwest University, we take the role of developing young women leaders for the future seriously. As a result, we breed the environment that is conducive for building these leaders, right from intake from high school up to when they graduate and when we engage them as employees within the institution. Judge Pillay is such an exemplary leader and a very important ambassador of South Africa. As we know, Judge Pillay has also been a judge in the International Criminal Tribunal for the genocide in Rwanda. This has put the country in good stead in as far as demonstrating the leadership from women like her. She is not only a judicial advocate, but also she is an academic in her own right. That can be simply exemplified by the fact that Judge Navi Pillay holds 18 honorary degrees, almost a record, 9 from our national universities and 9 from international universities. We warmly and heartily welcome her at the Northwest University and look forward to her engaging thoughts and insights on human rights versus women's rights. Welcome, Judge Navi Pillay, to the Northwest University. Thank you.
Judge Navi Pillay, thank you so much for being our guest here at the Northwest University. It's an absolute pleasure to have you join us.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Angeline.
Now, Judge Pillay, your career traversed a number of national and international organizations. One can also say you are an academic par excellence of our time. You know, you've been such a great example, awarded with 18 honorary doctorates, which are equally distributed amongst national and international leading institutions. Please tell us about your career highlights.
You know, I turned 80 last year. This year I'll go on to 81. So it's a long story. So to go back a long way, I from 6 years old, I wanted to be a lawyer. And I felt that's the way we know our rights. I was robbed. It was my father's money that I was carrying, and I was robbed and I had to go to court to give evidence. And as we walked out, I said to my father, well, did we get the money back? And he said, no. And I said, well, what kind of justice is that? You know, never underestimate children and how sensitive they are. So sorry to go that far back. Essentially, I'm glad I chose law because I felt then we would know what our rights are so that we could struggle for them, as we have done for hundreds of years in South Africa. So I became a lawyer, and no law firm would take me on because they said, you know, you're a woman, what if you fall pregnant? And does your father own any businesses? Will you bring in work? And thirdly, they said, well, you're black, and we can't have our white secretaries taking instructions from you. So doors were closed, and maybe that's one of the features in my life. When things are closed, you still go for the cracks and make it happen. So I started my own law practice. Even the male colleagues said she's very presumptuous if she thinks she can manage a law firm. So there's attitude, even from our own male colleagues. We were all at university together, and yet they thought a woman shouldn't be doing that. So that practice went on for 30 years, mostly what we call political cases. And during that time, I did the application for Robben Island inmates, where we got the court's judgment that they are not the property of the state, they can't be punished further, because all kinds of things were happening, that they have a right to a lawyer, and they have a right to literature and to study, which meant a lot to them. And they also had a right to cigarettes. In those days, that was great. So I'm just saying, it became a human rights office, and I was together with my husband almost 30 years. And then I was appointed by President Mandela as the first woman of color to be an acting judge. And the phone call came from the Minister of Justice, and do you know what I asked him? Oh, do you think I can do it? So that's the other characteristic about ourselves. You know, we're just too modest because we were crushed so much on racial grounds and gender grounds. So as you know, I then served 8 years on the Rwanda Tribunal, judging genocide cases, sentenced people to life imprisonment. And then the judges themselves elected me as president of that tribunal for 4 years. It's a long journey. And while I was there, I was deeply touched that inside South Africa, I was nominated for the position of a judge on the International Criminal Court in The Hague. And once again, I was elected and served there for 5 years. And then the Secretary General of the United Nations interviewed me and said that he would like me to start immediately. And I said, no, I have 5 months to go. No judge resigns, I said to him. But he was more persuasive. And you know, what was holding the whole thing up was the review conference of the Durban Racism Conference, which is so close to every South African. Yet over there, the Durban Conference became like a very bad word. So I'm glad I got in there. I served as UN High Commissioner for 6 years. Usually it's 4 years, but the member states appointed me for the further 2 years. So that was the first time that happened.
Oh, that's lovely. Now, Judge Pillay, you've also won many accolades in line of your duty, and you are such an inspiration and so influential as well. And of course, very successful. What does this recognition mean to you?
You know, you are quite right. Taxi drivers recognize me, children in parks. So I can't tell you the number of children who wrote about me in their essays at school. Yeah. You can never have too much of that. You don't go into a job for accolades or rewards. I was a public servant, and I did my job. I was paid well to do it. That's the bottom line. And it's wonderful that people recognize that, but it's also sad that people find that it's missing with most people who then gain positions of power, whether it's politics or as women leaders. So it really moves me. I walk through Durban, where I come from, and people recognize me all the time. Sometimes they don't know my name. It's such a long, cumbersome name, the long name of mine. You know what really impresses me? That they followed my work internationally. And here and the world over, students still study the world's first genocide judgment, where I wrote the section that rape and sexual violence is a war crime against humanity, and genocide. It was the first time, and that's in 1996. That's how long it took for the world to recognize what's done to women during wars is a crime, is a war crime. So even I didn't realize it's going to have such a huge impact. It does. I meet students all over, and some of them, one intern we had said to me that she had read the whole judgment. I mean, it's 300 pages. And I was thinking, would I find a student in South Africa who has done that or is familiar with the judgment? Academics are, but not student. And so I asked her, how did that happen? And she said, we have young, vibrant women lecturers who introduced it to us.
Wow.
So teachers have a duty, academics have a duty, so do I, to continue the education of people.
Now, Judge, do you think South Africa celebrates Women's Month in a way that is fitting to the plight of the more than 20,000 women who marched to the Union buildings on the 9th of August in 1956, in protest, of course, against the extension of past laws, as an activist and a champion, and of course a heroine of human rights on a global level? What is your key message to other women and society at large on this Women's Day?
I think as we year in and year out celebrate those courageous women who led the march. I mean, notice again, it's a woman who took the lead. And they were brutally treated and so on. So we remember them, but that shouldn't be their legacy. So I would say in South Africa, we have not delivered on the promise made to those women. And they were fighting apartheid. Here, they have their own people in government. And yet they're suffering economically, socially. If there's a promotion of a woman, it's usually one or two. Somehow they think this token representation of women is what those women who marched in that year really wanted. They wanted equality. They wanted to be treated with dignity. And they wanted economic and social rights and education. So none of that, well, it has been delivered to an extent, but there is no excuse that 30 years on, we haven't delivered as much as we should have on that promise.
Adding to that, Judge, women are still subjected to societal injustices such as gender inequality, gender-based violence, for example, underrepresentation in many working structures as well, in government and private organizations. The recent Banyana case, for example, that's a good case in point. The remuneration saga, pay disparities between women and men. How long do you think it will be before women are rightfully recognized and enjoy the same status as men? And more so, what should be done to change this patriarchal mindset in our society?
Well, I know people are predicting, like UN Women says, we won't have equality until 2050 or something. And nobody wants to wait that long. We can comfort ourselves that there is a body of well-established international law. And there are committees like the Committee on the Rights of a Child, CEDAW, the committee, the Convention to Eliminate Discrimination Against Women. So we've got a good body of law which sets the standards. So no matter what your custom or culture or race group is, those are the universally accepted standards for equality. So we're far from there, which is too sad. We have a good constitution, we have good laws, but lack of implementation and lack of political will to take that seriously. I think it's a truism when many, many people have said, you educate a woman, you'll educate a whole society. And that women who have succeeded, like you said, I did, should leave that ladder that they climbed on, leave it there for the next woman to climb up. So we also have a responsibility to bolster the rights of women also, not just to look for government, but to see where the fault lies and to correct that. And on sports, of course, we all rejoice that these group of women players have brought glory to our country. I did work a little helping the Olympic Committee just on that issue, helping them to draft, so we wanted equality. And there was a lot of debate. We don't actually want what men are getting paid. The standard should be equitable salaries. Now, that was so long ago. Do you know where the opposition came to the women who were asking for that? It came from our own officials who sat on these Olympic boards and so on. So men were blocking it. I think we're past that now. I celebrate where we are today. A young girl today will never put up with what we had to put up as young girls. So I see great advance. I see great prospects for South Africa. We can't just look to the government. Who do we look to? We look to the women's movement. Their organized collective power will bring a change to patriarchal notions.
Judge, one could also say the primary reason women are underrepresented in so many workplaces is because they face barriers in the masculine and Western model career path as they juggle between careers and families, for example. What is your experience in your career growth, and what more can you say workplaces can do to accommodate women and growth so that they can flourish?
Well, maybe you're right about describing it as a Western model. Although they're improving very fast. You know, when I was at university in the US, this professor invited us to his home, and I was so surprised. You know, he had a bag of onions hanging there. It was all cleaned up, no fluffy. He had nobody cleaning for him. He was doing it himself. So I said to him, you know, coming from South Africa in those days, I said, so who does your housework? And he said, well, I do. What do you think? I can't do it? We want to see that kind of change amongst our men, and we're contributing to the patriarchy by rushing and doing the dishes, looking after the baby and everybody. So if that's a Western model, yeah, we shouldn't be following it. Why? Because the African model is much better. For years and years and years, the women are the heads of families, and if you go back, you know, I studied what they called native law at the university when I was at university. And you could see the powers hierarchy, it's all there. And I've been to 79 countries, most of them in Africa. And you see the women-headed families, women who are running the business, women who grow the produce in the fields, and they work so hard. They do that. They come and cook, look after children, do the laundry. So there are, I think, you know, good examples in Africa that we can adopt. I really feel it was never the African culture to oppress women. It started off as partners and recognizing their position and power. So maybe you're right, it's a Western model that has taken us back. You know, I had the power as High Commissioner. I could tell governments. I told the UK, you started all of this. You discriminated against women, you had arranged marriages, you abused gays and lesbians. All that language is in your language, so you started it, including execution of people. I mean, look at that, Henry VIII, he killed 8 wives. What kind of example is that? We've got good examples in Africa. We don't have to look outside. We do have to educate men, though. Some young men ask me, what can we do? We don't want women to be beaten. We want to support their struggle. What can we do? So let's not make this a women-only issue. Let's not exclude them. Include them. So it's there should be movements of men and women making the change. And we have to be bold and expose discrimination wherever it occurs. I think the Me Too movement in the United States did all of us a huge favor. And this happened to be movie stars. The whole world admires these movie stars. And they suffered sexual harassment and discrimination. But their strong statements alerted not only the United States, but the whole world that we need to move away from patriarchy.
Now, Judge, you were appointed as an acting judge of the High Court in South Africa, in KwaZulu-Natal, in 1995. What was it like to occupy such a space immediately after the dawn of democracy? What were the primary challenges that you were faced with?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me this, because that happened in 1995. I mean, that's when we were free enough for the president to appoint, should I say, people who are qualified but were neglected because of their skin color. I got a call in my kitchen early on a Saturday morning, and the woman who, when I answered, said to me, "Hold on for the president." And I thought, ha, 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 this must be somebody joking. But it was President Mandela, and he said to me, "This appointment gives me great joy, and I hope it will become permanent. Naturally, I lost my voice, my tongue, and everything. Just said, thank you, President. But all the time I was thinking, could I do this? Would I be able to do this? So a number of things happened. The Bar Council, which was composed of white men, called an urgent emergency meeting. Agenda item 1 is Pillay's competency. And they took a decision that they'll moderate me to see how I'm performing as a judge. And that went to the press, and there were so many letters to the press to say to them, why didn't you raise these questions before, when it was all white and male? I love the public reaction and support for that. And when I got to the court on the first day, the judge president moved a list of names in front of me on the table and said, you need to appoint 2 assessors. And here's a list of people we usually have. So I look at the list, old, retired, white, male magistrates. So I pushed the list back and said, I'll appoint them, yeah. I appointed 2 African, unfortunately it was male, we didn't have enough black women in practice then. 2 African men who we were all colleagues at university. Well, so they created history. They were the first assessors. And there was no toilet for women judges. It was judges and secretaries. And then they said, I can't give any press interviews. So who said? So no, the president said. I said, I'm not calling them into the courtroom. And the orderly said, well, if you want to bring the camera people in, you have to go out and fetch them there at the front door. Yeah, well, I'll go out and fetch them, which I did. And there was this article, because it is historical to that appointment. And I said, it's being done in my office, not in the courtroom. And I want to point this out to say how when you hit a brick wall, there are ways in which you can push for change. The woman official who was the orderly for the courts also had very, very strict rules. She wanted everybody to follow those rules. So my office as a judge was on the 3rd floor. And every morning, this elderly white gentleman, he was the orderly, limping, I think he had lots of pain in his neck. He would climb those stairs up to my office, and then he's escorting me down. And I felt sorry for him and said, you know what, when you wait downstairs, I'll come down the stairs. And she came up to tell me, don't rock the boat. So don't make any changes. So we have to listen to that, otherwise we always will end up recreating the apartheid era condition. We should see, what's wrong here. So those were the few challenges. All my judgments were approved, even on appeal, those that went on appeal. It's true I had not served as a judge, but I was a lawyer for 30 years. So that was a good experience, but I didn't last long as... and the other thing is, look how wonderful the reaction of President Mandela was. He didn't say to me, I'm trying you out, see that you do a good job, don't let me down, yeah, it's a first. None of it. He said it gives him joy. But it didn't become permanent because President Mandela submitted my name to the UN General Assembly. It was 1995, and we were now back into UN as proper members, and it's a democratic government, and President Mandela. So I think that's why every country in Africa, every country in the world voted for me, so it was unanimous. And I felt very much it had to do with where I came from, which country, and what kind of president. So you build trust, just following his example. So the court was based in Arusha, in Tanzania, very rural, small country. But when I walked on the roads, the youngsters would call out, Bafana, Bafana. Oh. I hope today they'll say, Banyana, Banyana, yes.
Judge, let's focus more in depth on your international career. Mm-hmm. You were amongst the first candidates from a developing country, in particular the African region, to be in possession of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva, as well as the judge for the International Criminal Court in The Hague. I'm sure these platforms laid bare to the world what is faced with deep-rooted and systematic challenges characterized, of course, by inequality, social injustices, social exclusion, racism, and these are just a few to mention. What were exciting and challenging moments for you? Please share some of your experiences in these organizations.
Well, it expanded my world. As I come back, I look around South Africa. We've made a small world for us. We think we're the only ones suffering, that our cause is the one that needs the most attention. No. Gender-based violence occurs in every other country there. And they have 300 years or 100 years of democracy. They're still battling with these issues. And so the first thing I learned is we have to do things step by step. And we should not give up. I keep hearing people, very well-minded people. There was a student at UKZN speaking at a big conference where I happened to be present. So they say things like, South Africa is a violent country. Sorry, there's violence all over the world. So we shouldn't allow anything to hold us back from our future. So anyway, that was one of the first lessons. You had to know international law very well to sit in those courts. And no university here taught international law, so you had to learn all that by yourself. But I think that most of those early international judges also were not familiar with the law. So that's very scary. When you sit in a court here in your own country in South Africa, you know the law, you know how the courts have decided this. In other words, precedent, you follow precedent. There we created precedent every step of the way. In small ways and in big ways. We followed the Yugoslav tribunal because that was set up a year before us. The judges there drew up the rules and they came to us and asked us to adopt the same. And we said, no, we want to go through this because we wanted Africa specific. So there was one rule saying you have to have shaving gear for beards. And I said, women don't have beards. So that shocked this whole body of, I think there were like 30 judges in the room, me saying, well, women don't have beards. And it went on and on. Everybody was furious that I was holding up this process, raising what they said was a small point. And finally they turned to me and said, well, how would you frame this? I said, hygiene products. That fits everyone. That way you don't have to smell shaving kit, menstrual pads. Weren't they embarrassed when I listed all the things women need? So in small ways and big ways, I quickly lost this false impression that because they come from Europe and better universities, that they are more qualified. So that's another message to South Africa. Remember, make use of what we have here. You don't have to think that some other university overseas, just because they have lots of money, are better than us. So you asked me about the challenges of a lot of things. So clearly the biggest challenge is to be High Commissioner for Human Rights, because when you're a judge, you're judging. When you are a High Commissioner, you're an advocate. You have to work with governments and civil society. You understood civil society as your partners. We're just there to help them. There would not have been a High Commissioner for Human Rights in the United Nations if the women didn't demand for it at Vienna. That's where the World Conference was held. So that's another lesson we learned. We have to protest, demand as a movement, women and men, as civil for our rights here. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Governments don't have the will, and they just don't think about us. They have other priorities. So the position of High Commissioner for Human Rights is described as the most difficult job, more difficult than the Secretary General, because you're confronting governments on violations of human rights, and they don't like to hear that. They prefer that you pick on some other country and not them. And that was particularly the attitude of Western governments. I think they felt human rights violations applied to countries in Africa and so on. They would tell me, go and, there's conflict and fights and wars in Africa. You should deal with that instead of looking in our backyards. So I had to circumvent that, and I introduced new issues. I'm very proud of them in the United Nations. The first time that we came up with the policy that when there's a conflict, UN peacekeepers mustn't just pack up and leave. To see how fast they can pack up and leave, how can you stay and protect? The last incident was Sri Lanka, where they packed up and left, and the children, everybody were crying. You see, I heard the evidence in the trials in Rwanda when UN packed up and left, and the people were hanging on to the vehicles. Please don't leave. You can see the Interahamwe all around with machetes. Please don't leave us. As soon as the UN drove off, 4,000 people were killed at that spot, 4,000 Tutsis. It was a school premises. So you learn from your experiences and you raise it even with governments about implementing these international protections.
Judge, the world has just witnessed inequality regarding access to life-saving medical health interventions such as laboratory diagnosis, drugs, PPE, and the COVID vaccine-19 apartheid. How would you say history would remember the COVID-19 pandemic, and how will this pandemic go down in the history books?
It's been very clearly stated by President Ramaphosa, and I want to congratulate the government for pushing now, this year, for an amendment at WHO to allow countries to, especially developing countries, to make their own vaccines, and ordering the rich countries to share their knowledge about this. It's a very important amendment, has just been ruled. And why is that? Because everyone, but particularly people in developing countries, were astonished at the hypocrisy, the underbelly of all for themselves and not sharing. All those principles that they wrote into the international conventions fell aside. They were not complying with them because it was for the, America for Americans, as Trump said. So that's a crucial lesson we've learned. We saw it during HIV/AIDS. We didn't have medication for that, and we see it again. We have to prepare ourselves against this kind of continued exploitation of the poor and of developing countries.
Well, Judge, in conclusion, one could only hope and wish that the world was driven by values and principle of fairness, inclusivity and social justice, because we are interconnected and interdependent. Are you hopeful that one day the world will converge for all of us to live with each other in a respectful manner, in a cosmopolitan and diverse global village? How do you see it?
Well, I never thought that we will get our democracy here, that apartheid will end in my lifetime. I used to tell people I can't see it happening in my lifetime. So predictions are bad. We now know that you have to work towards change, for better change. People have to be alert to the discrimination or human rights violations. Our children are being hurt in this country. Women are being hurt. So it's everyone's responsibility, the community and so on, to watch out and make sure it doesn't happen, to work towards prevention. You cannot eradicate torture and killings and assaults and so on totally. That is idealistic. But we're getting there because the norms and standards have been adopted, and every country in the world has said they will abide by the Convention on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention on Economic and Social Rights, Convention on the Rights of the Child, except for the United States. Yeah, almost every country is a member of that. United States plus 2 countries, I think, are not. So standards are very important. We want to be part of this movement to advance human rights. So I can't predict when that will happen, but I think it's unrealistic to expect that there will be a perfect world someday. But why can't we, every day of our lives, aim to see that happen?
Well, Judge Navi Pillay, thank you so much for making time with us here at the Northwest University, sharing your insights, your experiences and your thoughts with us. It's been such a pleasure to engage with you. We wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Angeline. Of course, those are very important questions. What you're doing is helping to make people alert about these issues. So it's a very important role you're playing. It's been an honor and great privilege to come to this university. It's my first time. I'm very impressed, really impressed with just the vibes I'm picking up, yes.
Well, thanks again to you, the Northwest University community, for joining us for this, again, insightful interview as we had our guest speaker, Judge Navi Pillay.